From creation care to animal rights, in search of life beyond Earth and life after death, bridging the distance between the Bible and biotechnology. The exchange allows faith to inform science and science to inform faith in order to find guidance and understanding in our increasingly complex world. With our host, Dr. Paul Kurbis, the senior pastor of Westminster Presbyterian Church in Oklahoma City and founder of the Kurbis Institute, welcome to The Exchange, where faith and science meet to explore the deeper meaning of our lives and our world. The Exchange.
Thank you for joining us for this first episode of The Exchange, where faith and science meet. Our purpose here is to get back past that usual debate between science and faith. We're not going to try to prove the existence of God to science or let science prove there is no God. We're not going to get into the debate asking the question, do you believe in creation or evolution? In fact, that little word "or" is the problem. Whenever you use the word "or," you're setting up a conflict that has no winners. But here on The Exchange, we're going to change that word "or" with another word. It is the word "and." We believe strongly in faith and science. And we believe that people of faith can truly believe in creation and evolution. I'm a person of faith, and I'm standing in front of a science museum. We can put these things together. And that's what we're wanting to do here on The Exchange. It's the place where faith and science meet to answer questions and solve great mysteries of our lives and our world. In this first series of The Exchange, we're going to allow faith and science to meet to question one of the big issues facing our world today. It is the issue of the environment and the crisis of our climate. I suppose there are a lot of questions about what's causing our environmental crisis, but I think the science is clear. We are facing a crisis. Here in Oklahoma, earthquakes are increasing. There's a historic drought going on in California. The seas are rising, the polar caps are melting, and many species are near extinction. There's certainly a lot of problems facing our climate, and there's a lot of people considering what our role should be in helping to solve this. Why, even people of faith and in the church, we have this issue before us, and we use a certain word to describe our human relationship to the natural environment. We use the word stewardship. We say that we are called to be the stewards of earth and the stewards of nature. There's a lot of good meaning and intention behind that, but I have to ask today, is it possible that that word stewardship, when we use it for the purpose of nature, could actually be more harmful than helpful? Is it possible that it has no real biblical support, and that it has no support from science either? Here in this series, we're going to consider those possibilities and lift up a different word that we can use to consider our relationship of humans to our environment. A word that is supported by the Bible, a metaphor that truly will be helpful, and a word that is truly compatible with science as well. That's what we're going to do in our first series, which is a 6-week series entitled Sacred Place, Sacred Role. We're going to begin this series of Sacred Place, Sacred Role here in Session 1 by following a simple command that Jesus gave as he was offering his Sermon on the Mount. During that time, he said a simple thing. Jesus said, "Consider the lilies." When science follows that instruction, when they look deeply into the lily, they see something interesting there and something quite mysterious. So mysterious, in fact, that we might even call it possibly the fingerprint of God. And so, using science as a tool, in this first session, we're going to follow the command of Jesus as he said, "Consider the lilies." I suspect that as I show you a picture of this man, you'll recognize him immediately. He's the famous Charles Darwin, one of the most famous and I think controversial scientists in all history. As you probably know, Darwin is the one who came up with the theory of evolution. It's a theory about how the world came to be that many people think conflict with the literal story of the Bible. In this series of Sacred Place, Sacred Role, and in our whole program called The Exchange, where we're trying to build a bridge between science and faith, we're going to have to come to terms with Darwin and his theory, and we'll be doing that later in the program. But I mention him today because although Darwin was famous in his own right, he also had a famous cousin that many people don't know about. It's this man that you see, and I wonder if you know who he is. His name is Francis Galton, and he's a cousin of Darwin. You know, Francis Galton was a significant pioneer of science in his own right. He was the first one to study the theory of heredity. He was the man who actually coined a phrase that we use often in psychology, nature versus nurture. And he's also the one who came up with intelligent profiles, such as the IQ test that's used so often now. Galton was the inventor of the modern idea of meteorology. And he was also the first one to invent something that has revolutionized criminal studies even to this day. He's the one who discovered the very unique and individual thing that we all have. It's the unique human fingerprint. Galton realized that our fingers are equipped with tiny ridges that are caused by both heredity and the environment. And because of that, none of us have the same kind of fingerprint. Even identical twins don't have the same fingerprint. They may have the same heredity, but their environment may be different. And for that reason, all of our fingerprints are unique and individual. Your fingerprint is something that only you have. And indeed, his studies seem to have proven to be true. And today, the human fingerprint is used in many forensic investigations, as well as increasing security matters, as perhaps you have experienced in your own life. It's amazing for me to think that my fingerprint is absolutely unique. And it means that when I go around touching things like a Bible, a table, or glasses, that I leave on them an imprint that is mine and only mine. But you know, as you glance at these objects, a Bible or glasses or a table, you won't be able to see the fingerprint with the naked eye. You have to look much more deeply. You have to put these objects perhaps under a microscope. So using proper tools, that is, tools of science and proper processes, then that fingerprint is revealed. But that makes me wonder, is it possible that God has a fingerprint? Then as we look at the things that God has created, the world, the trees, the mountains, everything, that perhaps we could see somehow the fingerprint of God, a way to see that God is active in this creation and that He's engaged with the things that He has made. The real question that we're asking here is it possible that God has an imprint? And is it possible that He left it somewhere for us to find? If so, then where should we look for this fingerprint of God? Obviously, we should look for it on the things that God has made, on the mountain, on the river, on the seashell, or perhaps the star, all of nature around us. These are the things that God made, and perhaps we can find God's fingerprint on them. This is what Jesus was doing in His famous Sermon on the Mount. Jesus gathered a large group of people there, and He wanted to teach them something about God's nature. He wanted them to know about God's care for them and for the world. And in order to do that, Jesus wanted to show them that God's fingerprint was here. And so He gave us a famous line. Jesus said, "Consider the lilies." He said, "Look at this flower, this piece of nature. It's very special. It teaches us something about God." This isn't only true about that one flower. It's also true about the whole field. It's about the birds of the air. It's true about all of nature. You know, as such, nature is not just a mundane thing. Nature isn't just material. It's the very imprint of the character of God. This planet that we live on, it isn't just the earth. Perhaps we can call it this sacred earth, this sacred place. Is nature sacred? And do you sense the sacredness of nature in your own life? That's a question that we decided to put to the panel of theologians and scientists who we gathered together for a conference on this subject. I'd like you to listen to some of their answers.
We're all human beings, and we experience the world, and we also experience things that seem beyond the world as we see it. And trying to understand how those two things meet, I think, is important for a lot of us. One goes out and sees a beautiful vista and has some experience, not just of of the light bouncing off our eyeballs, but have some experience of something greater. At least I do, many of us do. And it would be, that experience demands almost for us to make sense of it.
We see nature's complexity, whether in the cosmos or in the natural world around us. And that helps us to reflect, it helps us to contemplate. There is a connection between our relationship with nature and the human spirituality. So I believe that we can learn better about God, we can connect more with God if we reflect and connect with nature itself.
I would say that nature, from my perspective as a person of faith, is sacred. And by that, at its most basic level, I mean that it's special and deserving of a particular kind of attention. When I think of nature, though, I don't have in mind just the great outdoors, leaves and trees and so and animals and so forth. I think that nature is that interrelated web of resources, persons, and things into which all human beings and all life are embedded. So, in a sense, everything is sacred and everything is fundamentally special and deserving of our care and our attention.
I think the sanctity of nature is an important concept because as a scientist, I don't often get to think of it in those terms. I think of nature as something that we study and enjoy studying. I'm an astronomer, so I love to study stars, planets, galaxies, things like that. But we typically study it as something you can analyze. This concept of a sanctity of nature implies that you incorporate both the scientific knowledge, but also an appreciation for where we fit into this whole picture of the earth, and that there's a value that's beyond just utilitarian value of the planet, of nature.
We need to recognize that there's more than just the human-built environment. There's the natural environment, and we have a lot to learn from it. We have a lot to gain from it. We can appreciate a whole bunch from it. And that's something that is really important for our survival, both in reality and metaphysically and psychologically and probably spiritually.
Thinking about the sanctity of nature is not some airy-fairy, nice little theological concept, but it's actually something that faces everybody every day of their lives. How are we going to treat the world around us? How are we going to sense we are a part of that world around us? And how are we going to live our lives in a sustainable way that's actually going to prevent the planet from dying?
Somehow, whether you're a believer or not, there is a holiness, a respectfulness that we have to have for our world and for everything in it. And of course, part of the problem is with pain and suffering and destruction, that task will be made a little better if we have a respect, because then we have a healing process or a process of trying to redeem what has gone wrong. So I see it very much as trying to bring into my mind and into other people's mind the importance of where we are, the importance of where we live, that this is something very special.
And of course, added to all of these voices is the voice of Jesus when he said on the Sermon on the Mount, "Consider the lily." As we're invited to look for the fingerprint of God on that lily, we have to realize that once again, you can't see my fingerprint on a glass or on a Bible, with your simple eyes. Instead, you have to look deeper. And I think when Jesus said, consider the lily, we have to look deeper into the lily as well. Dr. John Kerr, who is one of the scientists on our panel from Oxford University, suggests that we should take Jesus' words, consider the lily, and look at it deeper, to use some scientific processes to really look into the lily and see what we may find there. Look closely at that flower, he said, and you will see a pattern. This pattern is a sequence of elements that are arranged in a certain order, and this has a name to it. It's known as the Fibonacci sequence. What's fascinating about this pattern is that you don't only see it in the lily of the field, you can see it in many places in nature.
The sequence begins with the numbers 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, 34, and continues indefinitely. Each number is obtained by adding the last two digits together. If we were to take a perfect or golden rectangle, break it down into smaller squares based on Fibonacci's sequence, and divide each with an arc, the patterns begin to take shape. We begin to see Fibonacci's spiral. The spiral in and of itself is insignificant. Its importance is revealed in where we find it. Take, for example, the sunflower. The display of its florets are in perfect spirals of 55, 34, and 21, the sequence of Fibonacci. The fruitlets of the pineapple create this same spiral based on the sequence. The pine cone does the same. As currents move through the ocean and the tide rolls onto the shore, the waves that bring in the tide curve into a spiral that can be mathematically diagrammed onto a plot at the points 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, 34, and 55. Buds on trees, sand dollars, starfish, petals on flowers, and especially the nautilus shell are formed with this exact same blueprint. With each segment of growth, the nautilus adds to itself one more value on Fibonacci's scale. This blueprint can be seen around us on a small scale every day, but the greatest example of all is directly above our heads. At an average of 100,000 light years across, even the spiral of the galaxies above us are formed with the exact design that the tiny shell is formed.
You can see the Fibonacci pattern in the shells of sea creatures. You can see it on the pine cones of trees, and in the organization of bees in their hives. This pattern can be found in the smallest part of your own biology, such as your own DNA. The same sequence is seen in weather patterns of hurricanes, and even in the largest spectacles that we can witness. In fact, whole galaxies contain the very same pattern, as does that lily in the field that Jesus drew the attention of the people to in his Sermon on the Mount. So what do we make about this very interesting pattern that we see throughout all of history? Could it be that this is God's fingerprint and that God left it in all of the places where he offered his creation? If that's true, then I think we can say that nature is not just mundane. The truth is that nature, that everything God created, is a very special gift. As a sacred gift, it really promotes to us and witnesses to us the special character of God. And as a sacred gift, it is important in terms of our implications of what our role should be in nature and what our responsibility is for nature. You know, when Jesus said, consider the lilies, he was bringing together two important ideas. One, it's the sacred place that is nature around us. And secondly, it is our sacred role as human beings in this world. During this series, we're going to follow the implications of Jesus' words as we consider the lilies of the field. We're going to consider the sacred place and our sacred role. Now, as we do this, we're going to have to wrestle with some difficult questions. How did nature get here? And what does it mean to be human? And what is the future? of this natural world. Just as our search for the fingerprint of God requires the use of scientific tools, so too, when we address these questions, we're going to have to ask science to play a part in the answer. For that reason, we're going to have to bring together two important disciplines. And this is the purpose of the exchange. It is to bring together religion and science to deal with the big questions and the big mysteries of our world. I think it's safe to say that these two disciplines have not been the best of friends throughout history. All we have to do is to look back at the Scopes trials of the early 20th century, or even listen to some of the political candidates in our own day, and we can see that there's continually been and continues to be a real war and conflict between science and religion. I think that's a shame, and in many ways it's unfeasible and it's unnecessary. It's unfeasible because we can't possibly separate the two. At this very moment, I'm offering this program, which is a religious enterprise, and as I'm doing it with the tools of science as we record this and broadcast it. The two cannot be separated. To keep science and religion at odds with each other is just totally unfeasible. I'm suggesting that a war between science and religion, a war that's gone on far too long, is unnecessary, and more than that, it is unhelpful and unhealthy. The truth is that religion is an act of faith, and science is an act of observation. They don't trespass on each other's territories. The truth is that they inform each other's territories. When Jesus wanted to teach us a theological idea about the nature of God, he asked us to use the tools of observation when he told us to consider the lilies. Religious faith and physical observation are both employed in exploring the mysteries of God. Indeed, friends, nature is special. And for that reason, nature is sacred. It's sacred because nature has been created by God, and God's fingerprint is on it. It's possible that this fingerprint is seen in the Fibonacci sequence, or maybe not, but even so, the truth is God's fingerprint is there. Nature demonstrates to us something about the unique character of God. You might say in another way that nature is another kind of gospel. That is, it's a record of who God is and what God wants to reveal to us. Jesus knew about this special role of nature, and he used it to discern for us who God is and who we are in relationship to him. And he gave us just a simple yet profound instruction, one that we're going to follow during this series of Sacred Place, Sacred Role. It's all captured in those words when Jesus said, "Consider the lilies." Next week, we're going to look deeper into this sibling rivalry between science and religion. We're going to look at some of the great debates of the past and try to separate the truth of what was happening from the myth that many of us believe. So join us next week for The Exchange, where faith and science meet.
You've been watching The Exchange, a broadcast ministry of Westminster Presbyterian Church featuring the work of the Kerbis Institute, a ministry that seeks to advance the dialogue between faith and science. Visit Westminster at wpcokc.org and the Kerbis Institute at kerbisinstitute.org. How about attending a live class led by Dr. Kerbis? On Wednesday evenings, Dr. Kerbis is presenting I Believe, a modern look at some ancient words. In this class, Dr. Kerbis considers some of the major teachings of the Christian faith in light of our contemporary understandings. Thousands of years ago, the Christian faith was summarized in the words of the Apostles' Creed, but can we still believe it today? Whether you are a beginner or a lifelong Christian, this class is for you. So join us live at Westminster Presbyterian, 6:30 p.m. this Wednesday for I Believe. And join us again here on this station this time next week for the next installment of The Exchange. where faith and science meet.